Right. Hello. Welcome to my talk about mental health and how we can have a conversation about it, ideally without losing our minds. Bit of a content warning at the beginning. I will mention various mental health diagnoses, grief and trauma, and there's a very brief mention of suicide as well. So I just wanted you to know that before we dive right in. And if you've been on the internet lately, you might have noticed that there's a lot of talk about mental health, but there's also a lot of shit talking mental health. For example, just a short while back, Tom Holland posted a video to announce that he was going to take a break from social media for his mental health, which is a totally valid choice. And he also shared a bunch of helpful resources in his video. So that was really cool. But as a reaction to it, Amy Schumer decided to post her own video mocking him for it. Weird choice, in my opinion. But if you think back to, I think it was 2021, Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles both withdrew from prestigious sports competitions for mental health reasons. And they both faced significant public backlash. Like people were even saying things like, oh, they've let their country down. This one is a bit more of an oldie. Depending on how old you are, you might also remember how everyone made fun of Anne Heche about 20 years ago when she was found wandering around Fresno, knocking on strangers' doors and claiming she was God. The media called her a freak. Jay Leno called her crazy on The Tonight Show, and even Rosie O'Donnell mocked her on stage. Or maybe you've noticed how people have talked about Amber Heard last year, or was it 2 years ago, or speculate about Ezra Miller's or Britney Spears' mental state. This is a sad conclusion of how we as a society often talk about mental health, if we talk about it at all. Because often enough, it's all hushed voices, talk behind closed doors, there's this like leery curiosity involved, or a simple brutal judgment. But over the past few years, I've also noticed that some things at least are changing and getting better. Celebrities are still getting outed for their mental health, of course. But what's fairly new is that more and more celebrities have started opening up about their mental health by choice. Many famous people are talking about their battles with depression and anxiety. Chrissy Teigen and Alanis Morissette have both spoken up about their experiences with postpartum depression. And actress Annalyn McCord has even opened up about her diagnosis with dissociative identity disorder, which is a particularly stigmatized condition. Now, I'm nowhere near famous, but I do share something with these people. I too started talking openly about my mental health. And even without a huge platform, I've noticed that that has changed things for the better. And not just for myself, but for others as well. My name is Kai, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm a tech content specialist sidestepping into DevRel. I also run a mental health awareness project called Tabula Rasa. And today I'm going to tell you how that came about. For that, we have to rewind to about 12 years ago. I went through a mental health crisis that profoundly changed how I interacted with the world. I was about 26 when my dad died very suddenly and unexpectedly. And instead of things afterwards returning to normal, my grief sort of cascaded into something else, something I couldn't name. And despite regular therapy, I wasn't really getting any better. I went to see a psychiatrist, as you do, and this person floated such ideas as depression and adjustment disorder, but none of that felt right to me. And then finally, I saw a different psychiatrist who happened to be a specialist for adult ADHD. And yeah, turns out I had undiagnosed ADHD my entire life. And that had led to a pretty severe burnout. The grief about my dad dying, that was just the catalyst. Chances are very high that I would have burned out anyway at some point in the very near future back then. So yeah, I got my ADHD diagnosis. I started taking ADHD medication, which luckily works really well for me. And I kept going to therapy. And very slowly, very, very slowly, I got better. But before I got better, while all of this was going on, I started talking openly about how I was doing. I told friends, acquaintances, strangers. I even shared about it on social media. And I really wish I could like credit this to some grand idea or grand plan or noble thought. But the reality was just that I was too burnt out, too exhausted to fake being okay anymore. So when someone would innocently ask me, hey, how's it going? I would tell them how it was going, which was I was depressed, burned out, exhausted. I was not okay, and I wasn't able to hide it anymore. Now, these poor people who were just using a standard greeting phrase of, hey, how are you doing? Didn't know what they were getting into. But there we were, all of a sudden, having a conversation about mental health, a conversation that neither of us had planned for. Back then, I saw all kinds of reactions. Some people were taken aback, and I don't blame them for it. It was a lot. But many, if not most of them, eventually got over their initial discomfort and started listening. And then, miraculously, they also started talking. People started telling me about their struggles with mental health or shared worries about loved ones that they had. Maybe it was a parent with a personality disorder, a sister with ADHD, a colleague struggling with bipolar, or a child who has OCD. And as they talked, I often saw relief flood them, relief at not having to keep this hidden anymore, at being able to tell someone, to talk about it without fearing judgment. They knew I was a safe place, and my sharing was somehow empowering them to open up and ask for help and seek support. In those situations, as I'm not a doctor, not a psychiatrist, not a therapist, what I would do is I would give advice that I could point to resources, recommend therapists and psychiatrists, clear up misconceptions, or just simply provide a listening ear and understanding and judgment-free zone. But I also couldn't help noticing how very little people often knew. Even now, 12 years later, with the media covering mental health topics more and more, there's still a pretty severe lack of awareness about both mental illnesses and neurodivergence, such as ADHD and autism. There's a lot of misinformation, assumptions, and stigma attached to it all. And some of the misinformation can at least be entertaining. In the early days, when I first told people I had ADHD, someone asked, does that mean you need a lot of attention? You know, because it's attention deficit disorder. And I was like, yeah, I do need a lot of attention, but that's entirely unrelated to my ADHD. So that was funny, at least to me. But other times, the lack of awareness can also lead to really hurtful actions and situations. I remember someone once loudly asked, ha ha ha, Kai, have you taken your meds today? And I don't know if they did this thoughtlessly or maliciously, both would be possible with that person, but they did it in front of a group of people. And I was very uncomfortable in the situation. It's one thing for me to be open about my diagnosis and even joke about it and joke about my medication, but quite another for someone else to weaponize that diagnosis against me, or perhaps even out me if not everyone in the room knew I had ADHD. But these things happen even when there is no diagnosis to be weaponized, even. So I was recently watching a reality show. Yeah, so me, I love them. And this guy asked his girlfriend, who was being moody, what's up with you? Are you bipolar? First of all, don't say that to people. That's not something you should ever say to anyone. But additionally, he was also dead wrong, because those short-term mood swings that she was experiencing aren't even a symptom of bipolar disorder. So we've got misinformation, assumption, and stigmatization all rolled into one in this example. I do think the media is to blame for a lot of this, but we who consume the media, we who arguably are the media, are to blame as well. For one, there's our general language when talking about mental health. We talk about mental illness rather than mental health experiences. It's often suffering from mental illness rather than living with a mental health condition. And it's committed suicide, which assigns blame rather than died by suicide. But we also throw mental health disorders around as insults. We armchair diagnose celebrities, we blame mental health experiences for bad behavior, and other times we use them as excuses for bad behavior. We make fun of symptoms and mock people who exhibit them. So, how do we do better? As we established already, not talking about mental health is not really the way. So, we need to find less harmful ways to talk about it. We can work to create an environment where talking about mental health becomes a safe option, where people won't feel judged, misunderstood, or stigmatized if they open up about their mental health experiences. And one of the easiest ways everyone can contribute is by using inclusive language. I know it sounds extremely simple, and you're probably thinking, Kai, please, how on earth are the words I use going to help? But Desmond Tutu said, language is very powerful. Language does not just describe reality, language creates the reality it describes. And I totally agree with that. I think language is extremely powerful. It's one of our main ways as humans to communicate with each other. And the language I use when talking about certain things is going to tell you where I'm at. Just, I don't know, imagine you're queer, but you're not out, and you're talking to someone, and that person says, ew, that's so gay. Would you want to come out to this person? Would this person feel safe to you? I bet not. Similarly, we should never use mental health conditions as adjectives either. So just like we know now not to say that's okay when we don't like something, we should also learn not to say someone is so bipolar just because they were upset with us or are behaving in ways we deem irrational. And don't call someone borderline just because they treated you badly. We really need to think of better words that actually describe what is happening, rather than using mental health as a shorthand to describe everyday behavior. If we're regularly calling other people crazy, psycho, lunatic, bipolar, manic, delusional, etc., what we're doing is we're stigmatizing mental health conditions and their symptoms. And then we're surprised that people still have a hard time getting treatment for their mental health. We're surprised when celebrities who have all the money and access to get help unalive themselves, and no one knew before that they were dealing with something this big. But changing our language is actually ridiculously easy. For example, someone's crazy behavior can simply be described as irrational or unpredictable instead. The beautiful thing about language having power is that language almost always gives us an alternative we can use instead of the hurtful thing. We just have to put a little effort in. We have to care enough to want to create change. Another thing I've noticed is that people are downplaying mental health conditions and symptoms a lot. So, for example, when I was in the middle of burnout, I overheard someone I didn't know, just like at the next table over, I overheard them say, "Oh, I was so burned out last week." And I sat there and I was taken aback. Did this person want to imply that they cured their burnout from last week to this? Was I taking too long? Was I doing something wrong? Was I doing burnout wrong? Or was it just being overly dramatic when I could barely manage to make myself a cup of tea? As everyone who's experienced burnout sadly knows, there is no such thing as temporary burnout. If you were burnt out last week, I have some really bad news for you. You're still going to be burnt out next week and probably next month. Burnout isn't cured in a week. It takes 3 to 5 years, in fact, to recover from it. And what this person did was take a serious mental health concern that I was dealing with long term, and they used it to explain a fairly regular human experience, which is the feeling of exhaustion after a long week at work. But what could they have done differently? For example, they could have said, "I was so exhausted last week, much more than usual." That doesn't downplay burnout, but they're still able to say how they are feeling and be taken seriously about it, which is also super important because mental ill health encompasses so much more than just diagnosable conditions. It's also important to distinguish individual symptoms from whole diagnoses. So you can really like order without having OCD. There's a difference between having a depressing day and being depressed. And you can be bad at reading social cues, but that alone doesn't make you autistic. So when people borrow established diagnoses as a shorthand for how they're feeling, it blurs the lines between a fleeting experience or emotion and a diagnosable mental health condition or neurodivergence that can seriously impact a person's life long term. And that too makes it a lot harder for people who are affected to seek treatment and help, because to them it seems like everyone is struggling with the same thing anyway. They don't realize their situation is different and more serious. When I explain what ADHD is, people often react with, "Oh, but everyone has procrastination issues." And that dismisses the struggle that someone with ADHD is facing because their procrastination issues are serious and heightened and affect their life. So if someone tells you they have trouble concentrating because of their ADHD, please don't downplay that by telling them that you sometimes get distracted too. And unless you actually have OCD or suspect you do, please don't casually say, "Oh, I'm so OCD." Instead, consider turning it into, "I like it when things are organized." As I mentioned before, mental health experiences are also often used as an explanation for bad behavior. See Ezra Miller's news headlines, for example, or like in Amber Heard's case, they're used to slander someone's character. Often enough, mental health also gets blamed for mass shootings rather than blaming the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, racism, and a lack of gun control laws. These narratives all inextricably tie mental health to bad behavior. And that is entirely unhelpful for people who have gotten those types of diagnoses. In my case, the mistaken assumption that ADHD means I am a stage hog is a fairly harmless mischaracterization that I can laugh about because I am a stage hog. But the way the media has vilified Amber Heard, excuse me, but the way the media has vilified Amber Heard while constantly underlining her BPD diagnosis is severely stigmatizing. And it doesn't make it any easier for people who also have a personality disorder to be open about it. I understand that people often have this need to look for reasons for all kinds of behaviors. That is a human desire. But when we brand perpetrators with a certain mental health condition, that also stigmatizes the condition itself. If someone who has a personality disorder happens to be violent, and we start talking about that as if that's inextricably connected, then all people with that same personality disorder will be confronted with more stigma because the public will assume they're also violent. Of course, we don't have any direct control over what the media and other people do, but there are some things we can do to counteract these stigmatizing conversations and narratives. For one, you can change the way that you talk about mental health and make sure that you separate it from bad behavior. You can stop buying, and these days, actually, most importantly, stop sharing media that stigmatizes mental health conditions and equates them with bad behavior. And if you're feeling really brave, you can even start calling others out when they talk that way. All I'm asking you to do is to stop fanning the flames. It's so easy to be part of the solution and not the problem. And you can just do it just by changing your language. It's something you can do whether you've had run ins with mental health experiences yourself or not. But if you personally have had or are having mental health experiences, then please consider possibly talking about it if you are in a safe position to do so. Obviously, be careful not to trauma dump. That's something I probably wasn't really aware of when I initially started talking about my mental health, but it's something I try to be conscious of now. What I often do now is I leave out the super gory details of trauma, and instead I focus on the effect it has had on my life. And these days, I also don't randomly hit people with a topic when they're just saying hi and asking me how you're doing. But when you find yourself in a conversation about mental health, that's your chance to bring your experiences to the table, your real life experiences. It's an opportunity to clear up misconceptions and to shine a light on people's prejudice. And it's a chance to educate. Those who were previously clueless will hopefully walk away from the conversation with more awareness and more knowledge. But you sharing your story will be even more meaningful to those people who are also struggling with their mental health. It might just make them feel a little bit less alone when they see you're just like them. Maybe they'll feel empowered to get the support and help they need. And maybe they'll even find it in themselves to speak up as well at some point. It kind of has that snowball effect. These kinds of conversations can happen anywhere, in person or online, but I reiterate, if it's not safe for you to share, then please don't. I can never emphasize enough that your safety comes first. Personally, I find sharing to be a really powerful thing. I might have started sharing my story by accident because I couldn't fake being okay anymore. But when I first noticed that me being honest and open about it helped counteract the silence and the misinformation, it felt kind of amazing. And I wanted to do more than just tell my own story. So in 2016, I set up a mental health awareness project called Tabula Rasa. The idea behind it is to wipe the proverbial slate clean and remove the taboos by interviewing people about their mental health experiences and then sharing those stories. I've not done loads with it in the past years because, ironically, my own mental health interfered, but I have big plans for 2023. So fingers crossed. I believe the best way to create awareness and to destigmatize mental health is to create room for conversations about it, which is what I want to do with Tabula Rasa. And it's also what I try to do in my everyday life. I'm keenly aware that our society still isn't very well equipped for dealing with mental health stuff. Even just hearing about it can be extremely uncomfortable for most people. But staying comfortable never changed anything. So let's all do our part and start talking about mental health without losing our minds. Thank you very much.